Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Fixing Diablo 2. Now today we're going to be looking at a skill that is definitely one of those lost sheep that I like to talk about on a regular basis, which is, I don't really feel like Diablo 2 is broken, but there are certain skills within the game that are less popular and less used. One of those is Inferno. Inferno and also its cousin Arctic Blast, and as well as those two, it also follows along with the Assassin's version, which is the Assassin Inferno Trap. Now, the Inferno Trap doesn't have as many issues as the Inferno skill, but it's still subpar at best. And we're going to talk about why potentially Inferno is so subpar, and we're going to, try and figure out exactly what we can do to fix it. Now, I'm going to take a page from Diablo 4. I know you guys hate Diablo 4, but we're going to take a page from Diablo 4 anyway, because, well, I don't really care what you guys think anyway. So, Inferno and Arctic Blast are essentially the same skill. One is just cold, one is fire. Arctic Blast is actually superior to Inferno, in my opinion, and we'll talk about that as well. But we need to talk about the pros. What are the pros of Inferno? It doesn't have any. There are no pros. It's only cons. None. Let's talk about the cons of Inferno. What are the cons of Inferno? You must stand still. This is a big thing with Inferno. When you are casting the ability, you are forced to stand still. This is a really big thing. Inferno also doesn't actually have a large amount of damage because its damage is spread out between each individual spike, as you can clearly see here. See all these little spikes that come out as I spin my character? Each one of these spikes represents one tick of the Inferno, and because Inferno has these spikes, it just doesn't really do the amount of damage that you would expect. It does look very pretty when I'm doing this, though. And another big issue with Inferno is that, well, while you are casting it, as you can see, it's very dangerous. It's very deadly. You are stuck in a stationary position, which causes issues. The stationary position of Inferno makes for a very big problem. So not only do you have to stand still, but you are vulnerable while standing still. And what do I mean by I want to take a page from Diablo 4 for this? Well, in Diablo 4, there are ways that you can make your character tanky while you're channeling a skill. This is considered a channeling skill. And if you make yourself tanky while you are channeling a skill, then that means that you are going to obviously be much harder to kill. And this is not the case in Diablo 2. In Diablo 2, you are extremely weak while you are channeling this particular skill. It only has one synergy, but even with that one synergy, it's not really all that amazing. I'm just going to put some points into strength so I can actually put on my equipment. Where was that? Cold Plains? Let me go die out here real quick. Another big issue with Inferno is it's really not very good AoE. This is another con. So if we take a look at Inferno and how it dishes out damage, one of the main issues with Inferno, and let's go to Nightmare difficulty because the skill is really that bad. One of the issues with Inferno is it really just doesn't put out large amounts of damage per second, or however you want to explain it. It just seems to apply its damage very poorly, and even in the best of situations, I mean, here I am in Nightmare difficulty with a level 30 fully synergized Inferno, and let me just go ahead and throw in Fire Mastery too. And as you can see, it took me a little bit of effort to kill a Act 1 Nightmare monster. And in low-level areas, it actually has mild usability. But when you get into the higher level areas where the monsters have a large amount of HP, it's a lot harder to dish out the amount of damage that you need to, especially to multiple monsters. And I think this is one of the biggest issues is the multiple monster thing. So as you're trying to dish out monster damage to multiple monsters, you're going to run into an issue where the monsters are going to swarm you. And of course, these monsters are immune to fire, so that doesn't help. let's go to Arcane Sanctuary. There are some immune to fires in here, but there's also immune to physicals and some others that we can play around with. And they're a little bit higher level, so here we go. We've got some specters. So let's see how quickly we can kill the specters using Inferno. Not too terrible on the kill speed for one monster. There goes all my mana. And there goes all my mana again. And that is another problem with Inferno, is that it has a relatively high mana cost per second. It actually bleeds mana relatively quickly. And as a sorceress, you can usually start to get rid of some of the mana cost of the ability, but it really does take a higher level character to really mitigate all the mana cost of Inferno. Once you get your warmth maxed out, obviously, because that's part of the synergy for the skill, and once you can get your mana up high enough, you can start to mitigate the cost of Inferno. But then you're also in situations where, like that, where I got hit by a ghost and all of my mana disappears in a matter of seconds. And this is kind of like going along with the theme here, is that you must stand still and you are vulnerable. And on top of this, you are vulnerable because you're spamming a large amount of your mana relatively quickly, which means that even using something like Energy Shield doesn't really work all that amazing with it, because you have to stand still, get beat down, and spam whatever mana that you have into the ability to be able to use it to dish out damage. And killing monsters quickly with this ability is very difficult. It is extremely difficult to actually be able to kill higher level monsters, especially in like Players 8 or anything like that, or in any kind of like pack scenario, which is another big issue, is that they're just very difficult to kill in large packs, right? So if we go to, trying to think of a good place, let's go to Canyon of the Magi. So we go to Canyon of the Magi, and let's give our girl a fighting chance. Let's give her like maxed out frozen armor just for lulz. Let's go in here and let's fight a pack of monsters, right? So we're gonna do as best we can, right? Yeah, just absolutely annihilated from existence with level 30 frozen armor. And I know that this sounds like also it's almost like an infomercial, right? I'm like, and look, this thing can't even cut a tin can. But that's the truth of the matter is that the skill is so bad because you must stand still to use it. You are vulnerable while you're standing still. And it's very difficult to make a character tanky enough to be able to just stand there and take the punishment while you try and dish out the damage. Arctic Blast, on the other hand, which is an interesting contradiction, actually is one of the few skills in the game that actually does have some sort of mitigation to the fact that you have to stand there and take it. Let me show you what I mean. So if you go over here and let's go ahead and reset. This is Taco Hell. Go ahead and reset him real quick, and let's pump in 20 points into Arctic Blast. Right. So Arctic Blast is our analog skill, and it does have a synergy with Cyclone Armor. So let's grab that. Very nice, because it's a defensive ability. So we go out into say the same place. Let's go to Canyon of the Magi. And of course, he doesn't have any equipment on, but that's fine. What I want to show you is that this ability actually does have some usefulness in protecting yourself. If we can find a non-cold immune monster for once. It's like every single pack has the cold immunes. There we go. So as you use the ability, you're going to be able to chill the monsters and slow them down to be able to get to you much slower. So like for instance with the beetles, I have the opportunity of slowing them down a little bit on the way to me so that I can potentially fire for a longer period of time. This defensive capability that Arctic Blast offers isn't exactly the most amazing, but it is a defensive capability that allows Arctic Blast to exceed the potential of Inferno. So because this ability actually does apply a cold length to the monster, it provides a defensive ability. So what's my number one recommendation for this? Well, my number one recommendation for Inferno is to add a pro into this column. That the ability adds defensive capability. I don't know exactly what it needs to apply, Maybe it needs to give you defense while you're using the ability. Maybe it gives you a damage reduction. Maybe it gives you an increased block chance. Maybe it gives you, there's 100 different options. Maybe it gives you a myriad of things. You could have something in there that says, like, while channeling this skill, gain, like, 100% defense and, like, 25% DR or something. I mean, or it could give you like resistances or any other number of things. The point is that if they're going to force you to stand still to use an ability, which is not really the greatest ability in the world, and it does its damage per second, and I think that's the biggest problem with the ability, is that it does its damage in a per second basis, which means that to dish out the damage that you need to a target, you have to be able to stand still. Another big issue is that you are interrupted. If you get hit, you get interrupted. So we can add this down into the cons column, right? So if you get hit, the skill is interrupted. And this is really bad because the skill really doesn't do any damage if you're not casting it. And every single second that you cast it is another second that you're dishing out damage. And so every single time you get interrupted while using the ability, it is going to cause the damage of the skill to be even worse than what it would normally be. All right, so I think if I go out here into, I don't know, let's go to somewhere a little bit easier so I don't get immediately murdered. And let's find a pack of monsters, right? So if I start fighting this guy, see, he hits me, he stops me from attacking. He hits me, he stops me from attacking. Every single time he hits me, he's going to put me into a faster hit recovery stun, and he's going to stop me from attacking. So here's a suggestion that I would make for this particular ability. And this is a very small one, is that if you get interrupted, you get hit, you get interrupted, right, with faster recovery. So while channeling uninterruptible, okay, this would be very important. So while you are channeling either Arctic Blast, while you are channeling Inferno, you would be uninterruptible. This would mean that you wouldn't constantly have to keep recasting the ability to dish out damage. It would help out tremendously in the way that the ability works to allow the character to actually get the most out of it and actually dish out damage while they're under duress. And I think that's the biggest issue with this particular skill, is that because they make you stand still, because they make you vulnerable, and because when you get hit, it interrupts the ability, you are constantly under duress while you are using the ability. Another issue is that, well, it doesn't go very far. As you can see, I currently have level 25, and it has a range of 13.3 yards. The one that the sorceress has actually goes further, if I remember correctly, for a maximum of 20 yards. But here's my thinking on this. If you're going to force the person to stay still, if you're going to force the person to be vulnerable, if you're going to force the person to literally just, like, make themselves into a prostrated individual who's just ready to die, then my opinion is it needs to go even further than this. And it also needs to go further faster. So one of the, I think the biggest issues is the missile speed. If you look at how slow the missiles go, the missile speed being increased would be nice. So, like, let's actually time it really quickly. So if I just go boop, that's 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000. It takes 4 full seconds for that to hit the edge of the screen. If I were to use a similar ability, like, I don't know, there's tons of other abilities I could check, but let's check Ice Bolt real quick. How long does it take for Ice Bolt to hit the edge of the screen? 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. And I think Ice Bolt is the slower of the abilities. I think Ice Blast is faster. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. About the same. I think they need to speed up the speed of the projectile a little bit. 1 1,000, 2 1,000. So Glacial Spike is even faster. 1 1,000, 2 1,000. It's about 2 seconds. These are 3. Inferno is 4. Okay, so here's my thinking on Inferno is increase the speed of the projectiles for Inferno as well. And the reason why increasing the speed of the projectiles would be important is because, well, if you don't increase the speed of the projectiles, it takes a very long time to build up your damage, right? So let's pretend that there's a monster right here, right? Or actually, you know what? Let's go to Rogue Encampment because there's the little things outside that we can use as an example. All right. So let's pretend that this tree is the monster that we're trying to attack, right? And of course, we got fallen right outside the door. We can't actually dish out damage to these guys because we're fire-based. Okay, well, we can't do it there. Canyon of the Magi. We got the little torches. All right, so let's pretend that this monster right here at this torch is the monster that we're trying to attack, right? So we're standing over here as far away as we can because, of course, we're vulnerable. We have to stay still. We can't move, right? So we're not going to put ourselves in danger going in melee range with the monster, right? So to attack this monster, we've got to hold down the button 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, about 3 full seconds before our fire actually reaches the target. Right? So once our fire actually reaches the target, then it starts to dish out damage. Well, if the target moves or is moving, it's very difficult to maintain the fire damage on the target because we have to then chase the target, right? So let's say, for instance, I'm fighting a monster and the monster is standing right here. Then he teleports here. It now takes 3 full seconds to re-up the damage on the target that was here, that teleported here. Or if he's moving very quickly. If he's moving very quickly, I literally can't hit them. So if he's out here at the edge of my range, I literally will never be able to catch up with him, despite how pretty it looks. I'll never be able to catch up with this monster. And each individual little doojank of the Inferno does basically no damage. Like each individual little pip to a monster basically does like no damage. I mean, I can pull in some monsters here, and I'm probably going to get my butt kicked again. Yeah, freaking rip me to shreds. Just using this ability is such a pain in the butt. It's like the complete anthema of what you would expect from a sorceress. What are sorceresses? Sorceresses are weak, squishy, spongy characters. I recently got a comment from a guy on my skeletal mage video. He's like, why do you want the skeletal mages to be so tanky? Why do you want them to be so tough? He goes, they're mages. He goes, they're supposed to be squishy. And I'm like, yes, mages are supposed to be squishy, but they're not supposed to be that squishy. Like they're not supposed to be so weak that literally they're unmaintainable. And they're also not supposed to be so stupid that they stand in every single pile of damage and pack of monsters and get their butt kicked. And he uses a D&D example. I'm like, yeah, okay, well in D&D, where does your mage stand? Does he stand in front of the paladin and fight the dragon one-on-one in hand-to-hand combat? Or does he sit behind the paladin and use the paladin defensively, right? Well, it's the same thing for this sorceress. This skill just does not fit on a squishy character. You're a squishy character. You're not a particularly tanky character, right? So to use this ability, you've got to make yourself tankier. Which is why I feel that if they really want this ability to ever be useful at all, it needs to add some sort of defensive capability when it's used. The speed of the projectiles needs to be increased. I would definitely say that increasing the speed of the projectiles would be important, but keeping the range the same. So I do know that in Diablo, a lot of the times, speed of the projectile plus duration of the projectile is a lot of the times how you get range. So sometimes when you increase the speed or decrease the speed of the projectile, it actually increases or decreases the range proportionally. And this can actually be seen by using slow missiles on a monster who is using Inferno. So if you use slow missile on, say, Infector of Souls, who is one of the main monsters in Chaos Sanctuary who has Inferno, you'll notice that his Inferno doesn't go very far anymore. It actually has a much diminished range. This is because you decreased the missile speed, and by decreasing the missile speed, you also decreased the amount of time, or sorry, the range that it could go, because the range is based on time, and the speed means that it doesn't get very far. So, like if for instance, if I had an object that was going at a steady rate, like do, 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 boop, right? Well, in 4 seconds, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, well, there's your range. Right? But if it's a faster object, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, so it gets further because it's faster. Well, Inferno's distance is directly proportional to the speed. And so something that they would have to work on. So if they increase the speed of the Inferno projectile, which I do believe they should do, I also think that they should take that into account and make sure that the range stays the same of 20 yards. We definitely don't want to see the range go down, because it is something that you want to be using at range, and increasing the speed is literally supposed to help that. Another big issue is that it's really just single target. It's kind of an AoE ability in the same way that Bone Sphere is an AoE ability, I suppose. And for that reason, I mean, I guess there's a little bit of AoE-ness to it. But it's not really enough, in my opinion, to really be considered an AoE skill. It's moderately AoE by the most basic definition. Man, I can't ever win with these freaking ghosts. Hey, we did it. Look at that. We got them both. So one of the things I was thinking that might actually make a lot of sense with this ability is perhaps just making Inferno multi-shot. So within the game, there is a modifier that essentially allows Inferno to be multi-shot. It is a monster modifier that applies to Infector Souls and things like that on occasion, and you will see the multi-shot come out. It's basically just 3. So it's just 1 in the center, and then it has 2 coming out like this, right? And all that's really going to do is just going to allow you to hit more than 1 target directly in front of you. You'd be able to hit, a couple monsters. And one of the things that you're going to notice is whenever you try and use Inferno, and you're standing still, and you're trying to survive, what happens? The monsters all pile around you in a circle, and you can only hit that one monster that's in front of you, right? You can only hit that one monster that's directly in front of you. So this is part of the big issue, is that, well, you need to be able to hit more than just the one monster in front of you. So one suggestion that I would make, and I just wrote it down, was that you give it the multi-shot ability so that it has 3 prongs. Defensively, there's another way that you could make the ability defensive without actually giving yourself any kind of DR or defense bonus or anything like that. Another way is simply make it so that under your feet is a fire, like wall slash, circular effect, right? So basically, while you're channeling the ability, it certainly wouldn't be a terrible thing if something like this happened. So let's just go ahead and play with this for a second. And we'll grab Firewall. So let's just pretend for a second that I'm casting my Firewall, right? And as soon as I cast my Firewall, this happens. Or my Inferno, this happens. A Firewall basically just appears under my feet. Not this long, obviously. Maybe in the shape of an X would be interesting, just like a 1 and a 2, like 2 firewalls just in an X shape around me, or maybe just a circular impact. It could look something like this instead, which could also be interesting. Put a meteor-shaped fire like on top of me. So I'm casting my Inferno, and then bam, I get this like directly under my feet while I'm casting the Inferno. And as soon as you stop casting the Inferno, the fire disappears. Right? This could also be an interesting way to go about it, because it would make it more defensive in general, is just giving yourself the fire under your feet while the effect is active. Now, all of this I'm absolutely, completely worried about, because the monsters in the game that have Inferno are already pretty tough, because Inferno, for some reason, despite the fact that it works absolutely terribly against monsters, tends to work really, really well against players. And giving the monsters these same effects would be scary. Infector of Souls is already very scary, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. But if he had a lot of this stuff that I'm suggesting, like permanent multi-shot, uninterruptible while channeling the skill, a firewall under his feet, I mean, all this stuff would basically make Inferno absolutely ridiculous, and Infector Souls would be insane. But I think if you achieve some of these goals, Inferno might actually be useful, and it might actually be fun to make a character around it. I mean, all of this is really quite interesting. And taking another page from Diablo 4, I know you guys hate Diablo 4, but I'm doing it anyway. Standing still means you're slow, okay? Means you are slow. All right, this is very important because a lot of people don't consider this, is that when you're forced to stand still, you're also slowing yourself down. A good example of this is in Diablo 4. There's a effect known as like the lightning storm or something along those lines, and it comes down, and when the lightning storm comes down, it makes a shield, right? And you have to run and go stand in the shield, and you have to wait. Because if you're in the shield and the lightning strikes, you're safe. If you're outside the shield and the lightning strikes, then you get hit by the lightning, and the lightning does a lot of damage depending on what tier of dungeon you're in, right? So you could potentially die. Well, one of the things that they realized in Diablo 4 was that, well, making the person stand still was slowing everything down. So what they did was they gave a speed buff, a movement speed buff, to the characters who stood in the shield. So if you stand in the shield, you get a movement speed buff to offset the fact that you are constantly standing still. All right? So here is my suggestion for this. Because you are constantly having to stand still, every single time that you use the Inferno ability, we could combine things together, right? So what's an ability that gives you a movement speed buff? Well, Blaze gives you a movement speed buff. Interesting. So we set up a situation which is very similar to the way that Blaze works, so that when you cast Inferno, you also get Blaze. So basically, by casting Inferno on your character, it automatically casts Blaze on you. But instead of the Blaze effect being exactly like Blaze is right now, it's more like the meteor fire, right? So it comes down, boom, you got the meteor fire underneath your feet, right? Well, that's going to be your Blaze effect, right? And then that also gives you the movement speed bonus to kind of offset your problem. So while that fire is active, you're going to get your movement speed buff, and then for a certain number of seconds after the fire disappears. So it would be something along the lines of like this. So movement speed buff, like active while fire is active, and then for like 15 or like 10 seconds after fire disappears. And the reason why you would do this is because you're constantly going to be stopping to cast Inferno. You're constantly going to be stopping. Every single time you stop to cast Inferno, you are basically, going to be falling behind everybody else in the group. So giving yourself this movement speed buff to increase your movement speed every single time you cast Inferno and for a certain number of seconds afterward is going to make it so that you don't fall behind and so that your character's not going so much slower. This will offset the fact that you constantly have to stand still. It will offset your vulnerability as well because it will allow you to kite better. So one of the things with Inferno is that obviously you don't want to just stand there and get wailed on. And this is very important. Your goal is not to just stand there and die like an idiot. Your goal is to back up and actually dish out damage, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to kite. So in the case of these young, I'm going to attack, I'm going to back up, and then I'm going to attack again, and then I'm going to back up, and I'm going to continue to do this. The movement speed buff that you get, or that I'm proposing here, would allow Inferno to give you that kiting capability, to give you a movement speed increase, which would help you during the time you need it most, which is while you're fighting. So allowing you to cast the ability, run away, cast the ability, run away, cast the ability, run away, and so forth and so on, so that it would help you defensively to stay out of trouble. Now, granted, there's going to be some situations where you're going to be in trouble, and that's when the fire underneath your feet will help you out, and also perhaps the defensive capability that we were talking about, adding maybe some defense or some DR or something like that that can help you. And making it so that you're uninterruptible while using the Inferno ability will help tremendously against FHR stuns that will cause the ability to stop being used during that time period. I think this is important because if you don't do this and you get into a situation where you're in danger and the monsters start surrounding you, you're basically kind of screwed with Inferno. There's really no way for you to use Inferno properly when you have multiple monsters beating on you, so it's another issue. All in all, I think this would fix it. There's really not a lot more that needs to be done. You have to have the AoE capability, which is what the multi-shot would allow you to achieve. The uninterruptibility would allow it so that you could actually keep firing within melee range. This is important because the entire goal of Inferno would be to make your character tanky enough to be able to take that kind of damage. And if you can take that damage, you need to be able to continue using your ability while you are getting hit. Number two, or I don't even know what number I'm on. The movement speed buff would help out tremendously to mitigate a lot of the problems with constantly standing still. So that number one, you could keep up with the rest of the group. Number two, so that you don't feel like you're slower than all the other characters that are playing the game. Number three, it would help you with kiting, which is very important for this ability because you don't necessarily want to be within melee range of a monster, depending on what monster that is. All of this would apply to Arctic Blast as well, obviously. As for the trap, the Assassin's Trap, I do think that multi-shot would be helpful with the Assassin's Trap because it is very bad for anything other than single target. The speed of the projectiles, we talked about increasing the speed of the projectiles. That would also help the Assassin's Trap, and that is definitely something that I would definitely do with this because the speed of the projectiles on Inferno is just way too slow. I don't necessarily think that the Assassin Trap should get the little fire thing underneath of it. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. I don't really feel like that's a terrible idea, especially since the fire doesn't stack. So it's not something that you would be able to, like, say, for instance, cast all of your Inferno traps on top of the target and have the fire stack from 5 different sources. Because fire damage doesn't really stack in that way. Like, you can't cast multiple firewalls on a monster and get, like, an insanely large amount of damage. It does kind of stack a little bit, but it's interesting that multiple fire effects don't really stack in the same way as like multiple damage attempts, like if you get hit multiple times from multiple monsters. I think, can't remember off the top of my head. Trying to see if I have a good formula here I can show for that, but I mean, honestly, I don't really know if the traps really need the fire under their feet either. I feel like that's something that could probably be avoided relatively easily. But there is a lot of interesting things that go on with the way that fire works, and having multiple firewalls this is the equation right here for like multiple firewalls. It's a little complicated, but there is an increase. It's just not as much of an increase as you would think for having multiple firewalls. The fire damage per second does go up, but there is a maximum bit rate that can be achieved. It's something, where is it right here? It's like 256 bits within within a thing, and what happens is like all the bits can be consumed, and so then the fire basically hits a maximum damage value for that time period, and it just doesn't exceed that. So, I mean, maybe it would be overpowered. I'm not really entirely sure how that would work. Right now, the Inferno trap, if you are a fire assassin, is literally the highest single target damage that you can get. Wake of Fire is much better for the AoE. The changes that I would make here that would affect the assassin trap would potentially add a little bit more AoE, but it still wouldn't exceed Wake of Fire. And then on top of that, I mean, a lot of this stuff wouldn't affect it anyway. Being uninterruptible doesn't affect the trap. The multi-shot does, but again, like I said, it's not really going to make it more single target damage. The movement speed buff doesn't affect the trap. The fire under the feet could potentially. That could be an interesting option. I'm not really sure how that would work. The defensive bonus doesn't affect the traps because they don't have any kind of HP and so forth and so on. So most of the changes that I'm proposing here wouldn't affect the traps anyway. This is really for the sorceress. This is really for the druid. And ironically, also for the very odd items that are within the game that give you Arctic Blast and Inferno. There's two of them. They're both weapons, I believe. One of them is the I can't remember the names right off the top of my head. They're both swords. Frostwind, I believe, is the one that gives you Arctic Blast. And then there's what is that other one? It's a big giant like two-handed sword. Kind of looks like Kinnan Mel's All, but it's not Kinnan Mel's All. My memory is like Swiss cheese sometimes. I can't always remember everything. Some things just leave my brain. And I'm sure as soon as I see it, yeah, Flame Bellow. Yeah. That's immediately remembered. So these are the two swords that offer the ability. Frostwind gives you the +7 to 14 to Arctic Blast, and Flame Bellow gives you the, is it Flame Bellow? Inferno, yeah, 12 to 18 to Inferno. So it would also affect these two as well, because these are obviously granting you the skill, which means that you would get the same benefits with these. And I mean, overall, I think if we made these changes to Inferno, it would fulfill its fantasy, which is what it's supposed to do. I'm really just worried about the monsters that use these abilities, and there are two monsters. The Venom Lords, not Venom Lords. Actually, the Venom Lords do use it as well. It's basically all of those winged demon types can use Inferno. And then in Act 5, the Frost Creepers or whatever, the ice monsters, they can use Arctic Blast. They're usually in like Crystalline Passage and things like that. Watch them not be here now, so I can't show you. But these guys also have it as well. I'm trying to see if we have the monster type in here. We've got two monster types. There's always three monster types, by the way, in every area. We've got skeletons, and then we've got the lancers, or the archers. And the third type is it's snow drifters, so that did not work out to our favor. Let's try one more time, shall we? So we got snakes, we got mages, and I'm not even going to bother looking for the second one because I'm not going to make it. Of course, I'm going to hell difficulty. I should just go to normal difficulty since I'm trying to show you something. But I'm not smart, okay? I'm not an intelligent person. Let's grab teleport so we can actually teleport around. Nope, we got Yetis. I don't really need to show you guys. I don't even know why I'm going through this process of trying to show you guys, but it's something fun to see, at least, if you didn't know that these monsters had the ability. And beefing up the main ability also, in turn, beefs up all of these monsters as well, so... There they are. And there's the Arctic Blast. And there I've died. Frozen creepers. Poopy frozen creepers. I don't know. I think I've spent long enough on this ability. I would like to see Inferno and Arctic Blast eventually be interesting. complete, like, just to be completely truthful here, I've built an Arctic Blast Druid back a long time ago when I was younger. I thought it was a cool skill, and I wanted to play around with it, and it just didn't really work out all that well. I mean, I ended up becoming a Hurricane Druid anyway, with Arctic Blast, and it kind of worked okay with Hurricane. And the reason why it worked really well with Hurricane is because, well, Hurricane is defensive, right? And maybe that's, like a clue there, is that, from my past, you can see that I did eventually make Arctic Blast work, sort of. But to do it, I needed to have some sort of defensive capability so that when I was standing still, I wasn't just vulnerable, right? So the sorceress needs some way to make Inferno also give her some sort of defensive capability. I think the movement speed and some sort of fire under her feet could be very nice. The thing about Hurricane, though, is that Hurricane applies chilling effects, right? So makes it defensive in that way. Inferno, on the other hand, doesn't have that same thing going on. It doesn't have a chilling effect, and she doesn't have access to Hurricane. So there's basically no defensive capability with Inferno. Arctic Blast is already leagues ahead of Inferno because it has its own defensive capability built in. And maybe that's a clue. Maybe what we need here is that Arctic Blast and Inferno maybe need to apply Slow's Target. Maybe Slow's Target is a very interesting option here. Maybe we can add this into our defensive capability. Slow's Target could potentially be useful here because if you can slow the target down, then you can potentially dish out more damage to them while they're being hit by this ability. So I don't know how much would be a decent amount. Even just like 20% would be better than nothing, but having some sort of Slow's Target built into Inferno or Arctic Blast would be a big boon to the survivability of the ability. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just yakking about Inferno for 42 minutes. And let me know what you guys think about the changes that I'm proposing. Are you interested? Or you think they're stupid? Do you think it's going to break the game? Don't be shy. Put it down below. Just remember, be civil. If you want to be a member of the community, be civil. Otherwise, I'm going to ban you. As always, thanks for watching, and